Good morning, it's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm. Today I want to talk to you about how to plant your own root roses in the ground and establish those in your garden. And I promise we will get shovels in the ground in just a moment here. But first I want to explain why I've made a separate video talking about own root roses versus grafted roses. And if you don't know the difference between those two production systems, I've made a video on the topic. I'll link it up above here, but the only part that's important for this stage, the planting stage, is that you know that grafted roses tend to be grafted onto a very vigorous rootstock and have a very large crown, which means they can establish quite quickly in the garden. Own root roses can vary quite a lot in their vigor, and so I usually try to get own root roses put in as large a size as I can find. This one here I just purchased from another supplier, and although it's a fairly respectable size to arrive in the mail, I wouldn't feel good about putting this right into the ground. I don't think that it would have enough time to establish a good root system before more severe weather comes in. If you look behind me here, you'll see the blueberries plants are starting to change color, go red a little bit, which means that fall is here, winter is coming on, and then once that cold hits, the root development will basically stop on my plants, so I don't want to risk it with this here. I would feel much better planting this up, potting it on to a larger pot size. So let me show you. This is an own root rose that I've grown on into a gallon size. And at this point, with a big root system like that, I would feel fairly good putting that into the ground this time of year or any time of year. Even better in a larger pot like this one here. So that's the first thing I'll talk to you about with the own root roses, is that if you get them in a smaller size, it may pay to have a potting up step, grow them on, fill them up in a larger pot before you put them in the ground. Okay, let's get to planting. Okay, I'm in the planting location now, and I thought I would break up the topic of how to plant your own root rose into 4 basic questions. The first one of which is, how do you prepare the rose itself? The second one is, how large of a hole, a planting hole, do you want to dig for your rose? The third one is, what else goes into it? What else do you amend it with? And the fourth one is, how deep should you plant the crown of your rose? So I'll take them all in order here, and clearly I have some opinions on these things. I'd rather not treat this as an I'm right, they're wrong kind of a thing, but rather open a discussion with you about it. I'll give you my opinions, you can look up the rest, and we can talk about it in the comments of the video. So the first one is relatively uncontroversial. Unlike grafted roses, where the instruction is usually that you're getting this dormant bare root rose and now you should soak it, this one comes to you active, in active growth with active roots. And so the only instruction I'm going to give you in preparing it for planting is that you should pull off some of this loose potting soil, which I really don't want to make up a major component of the planting hole. The potting soil will tend to break down over time. It's made out of, in my case, composted wood bark and wood chips. So I don't want that unstable organic component in my planting hole. The other thing is I want to break up the roots across the bottom here. I want to let them start to wander there. Now, if you find that you get one that is relatively root bound, if you bought it in a pot, it's relatively root bound, all of the sort of yellowish roots are sort of wound around the outside of the pot, you may take your pruners or a knife and just slash down the side in various places. It sounds damaging, but what it really will do is allow some of those roots to regenerate and start to explore, which is what you want them to do once they get into the soil. The second topic is, how large of a hole do you want to plant? And for me, I have a different opinion on this than many people who talk about how to plant a rose. I view it as I only want a hole that's just barely larger than the pot itself. So I'll show you in the footage that I do here that I'm just digging just slightly larger than a 1 gallon pot. I take the native plant soil, the soil out, and set it aside, and I use that to backfill, but I don't want too large of a hole. Why is that? Well, one of the issues I've run into in this area here, because we get some harsh winds from the south in the summer and from the east in the winter, I get a bit of wind rock. And so having a big planting hole with a bunch of loose soil around it isn't firm enough to support my plants. What I really want my plants to do is to get their roots and start establishing into the native soil nearby, the firm native soil nearby, so they can start to support themselves as quickly as possible. That's my goal. So I don't part of my answer goes to the next question of what else do you want to put into that planting hole? And I hear all sorts of recipes. I hear people talking about putting in alfalfa, manure, compost, bone meal, blood meal, every organic amendment you could possibly think of, some that I haven't even thought of, and going into that planting hole. And for me, I don't want to put a bunch of other stuff in the planting hole. That's the answer to my next question. So it does answer why I don't need to dig a big planting hole, because I don't need to mix all that soil with a bunch of organic amendments to go back down into that hole. I just want enough room to fit the rows. That's what the hole is for. Now, going on to the next topic, which is why don't I want to put a whole bunch of other amendments in there? So let's take this logically. Let's take it, from an objective point of view. What is it that you could add at the time of planting that you couldn't later add as a top dress? Okay, so top dress meaning I could add manure to the top of the soil later. I could add compost, leaf mold, alfalfa, any kind of a more organic amendment or inorganic amendment, any of the fertilizers I can add to the top of the soil at a later time, and it will work its way back down through the profile of the soil. So why would it be important that I add it to the plant at the time of planting? Then the question becomes, well, why wouldn't I want to plant it in there at the time of planting? And it goes back to that answer of firmness and stability of the rows. I want those roots to go searching. I want them to go out and start looking for food, looking for water, start establishing into the native soil and getting themselves firm in the planting hole. If they're dug into sort of an artificial pot of loose soil in the ground that's very rich with a bunch of amendments, there's a couple of risks there. One, you could have amended it too heavily. It's a bit hot, you've put in too much fertilizer, and now you burn the root system as it's trying to establish. The second thing is that maybe the roots will just be satisfied to stay in that one little spot, feeding on that rich, artificially amended soil, and won't go searching down into the soil profile and won't establish those roots for anchoring, which is one of the primary purposes of a root system. So that's the reason why I don't want to add a whole bunch of stuff to the planting hole. And honestly, I don't see the risk, because even if I miss something, I can always add it back again later. So I like to establish my roots relatively lean with not a lot of extra material in there. One last note on this is that if you add a whole bunch of organic stuff into that planting hole at the time of planting, well, as I said about the potting soil, that's just a holding material. It will shrink down and disappear over time. All organic matter does. So if you've left a whole bunch of organic matter, if it makes up a major component of your planting hole, that stuff will begin to disappear and disintegrate over time, and you'll be left with a plant that rocks around inside this hole because there's not a lot of, because the soil has shrunk away from it a little bit. So it's left some voids in the soil. So that's my answer to those two questions of how big a planting hole you want to dig and how and what else you'd like to add to the planting hole. The final question that people sometimes debate is the question of how deep you should plant this. So this is basically the crown of the plant, the place where it came out of the ground, okay, is right around here, okay? For me, that's the soil level. That's how I want to plant it. So some people actually recommend that you bury it a lot deeper. So going up from this crown here, go up by either 3 or 5 or 6 inches, and basically it covers the crown of that plant with a layer of soil. So why do they recommend that? Typically it has a lot to do with them saying it protects the rows a little bit better from winter weather or freezing. It's usually a hardiness thing. I've heard other explanations as well, like better support. My reason for wanting to go only at the crown there, for me it seems like the most natural place to plant a rose. It's what I do with my trees, it's what I do with my other shrubs, it's what I do with my perennials. I want the crown right at the soil level where I can see it. The crown is actually a pretty vulnerable spot on all of your plants, but roses particularly. Whether it's a grafted rose or whether it's an own root rose, crown rot is one of the risks to your plant. So if you bury it low down, you can't see it. It's down there, it's more exposed more continually to moisture and soil organisms, whereas if it's up at the soil level, I can see it, I can inspect it, I can check the condition of my rose, and I just tend to feel it's the most natural place to plant a rose. So again, we can debate that. Okay, that covers my 4 questions on how to plant an own root rose. And I thank you for watching. If you have any questions, but particularly if you want to debate some of these things, that's what I find these videos are really useful for, is that people who know a lot about roses can come in, leave their opinions in the comments below the video, and we can have a good solid debate about it and maybe educate everybody along the way. Thanks so much for watching.